record onto this computer.
Well, it says it's recording.
It did last week too, but it didn't do it. So I may have not clicked record onto this computer, and we probably don't have the bandwidth on the iCloud at this point to handle any more videos. So I can't have it. Okay. Hello, Kevin. Hello, Anne. Hello, John. Good to see you all. Welcome.
Good morning, Christopher.
Thanks, Risa. So let's go right to the prayers, because today's session is we're getting into some challenging topics in the wisdom chapter, and I think we need to make sure we leave enough time for discussion and questions and things like that. So we'll just go right through these prayers in a very efficient manner. Taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. Sangye chadang Jangchu bardu dakni kyapsu chi dakni jinso ipe sonam ki rola penchir sangye ruparshu sangye chadang soki choknam la Jangchu bardu dakni kyapsu chi Daki jinso ipe sonam ki rola penchir sangye ruparsho sangye chodang soki choknam la Jangchu bardu dakni kyapsu chi Daki jinso ipe sonam ki Rola penchir sangye ruparsho. For immeasurable thoughts. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May we be blessed and inspired by our gurus and the Buddhas and all the Bodhisattvas to have the power to accomplish this. And the seven winged. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind, and present clouds of every type of offering, actual and mentally transformed. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time and rejoice in the merits of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until samsara ends and turn the wheel of Dharma for sentient beings. I dedicate the merit created by myself and others to the great enlightenment. And now the Mandala offering. Sajipati Juching Meto Ramri Radliji Nidegyen Pati Sangyeji Mide Mulwani Rokun Andachila Chapasho Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Viryat. And then let's look at the essence of causation mantra and the stanza from Nagarjuna. Yedama Hetu. Om Yedharma Hetu Prabha. Hetu Tesham Tathagato Yavadat. Tesham Chayo Niroda. Evam Bhagimaha Shramanana Swaha. And Nagarjuna's stanza from the Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way. By extinguishing actions and afflictions, there is liberation. Actions and afflictions arise from misconceptions, and misconceptions arise from elaborations. Elaborations will cease through cultivating emptiness. All right, so as I mentioned before this recording started, for anybody who may be watching the recording, the last session we did, the recording didn't occur, it didn't happen for some reason. So the study guide though is available, and if you go to those particular sessions that were on the selflessness of persons, the study guide for that session that was not recorded is there, and we had a lot of actually really good questions and discussion that came up during that particular session that was not recorded, and so I addressed those and made some changes to the study guide to reflect those questions. So for anyone who's interested in that, it's all available on the study guide. Okie dokie. Now, before we get into this is the next section of the wisdom chapter, which is about the selflessness of phenomena. The previous section was about the selflessness of persons. And we have always been taught, it's in all the Buddhist teachings, and all of our teachers reinforce this, that the selflessness of persons is something that is actually easier to grasp and comprehend than the selflessness of phenomena. And as I'm getting into this particular section, I agree with them. I totally agree with them. So this first part is talking about the selflessness of the body. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about the purpose of the Bodhisattva path. Many people come to Buddhism because they're attracted to the Buddhist teachings on love and compassion and ethics. And when we look at the serene demeanor of all the statues and the images of the Buddha, we think, if we study Buddhism, we may be able to realize this for ourselves. Many have faith, many people have faith that the Buddha or our spiritual guide will be able to have the power to transform our lives. And all of that is true, but it won't occur without wisdom. And in Buddhism, wisdom refers to the understanding of the ultimate nature of reality, combined with our direct personal realization of that. So the purpose of the Bodhisattva path, the purpose of studying this information, the purpose is to develop our loving kindness, compassion, ethics, and wisdom to such a level that we are able to truly benefit all beings who want to be happy and don't want to suffer. In order to do this, in order for us to be able to do this properly, it's not enough to have faith in the Buddha's words. The Buddha said we should not simply believe him, but we should put his words to the test and find out for ourselves whether what he said was the truth or not. Otherwise, studying the Buddha's teachings would merely be an intellectual pursuit that could be very interesting, but would have no transformational power. So it's very, very important that we understand the Buddha's teachings and we experience them for ourselves. So the qualities of a bodhisattva, love, compassion, ethical behavior, they are completely interconnected and interdependent with wisdom. Without wisdom, our loving compassion, our ethics will be unstable without the wisdom. And so this is why the wisdom teachings are so important. And it's especially helpful to remember this when we are studying something like this, some topic that is difficult for us, perhaps, to fully understand. And and to comprehend.
Or feels like just an intellectual.
Or just feels like it's just intellectual information, and what purpose, this is why I'm saying this. There is a purpose, because without this information, without this wisdom, we will not have stable love, compassion, or ethics. It's essential. And so it's essential for us to sort of gird our loins, put our thinking caps on, and try our best to understand what is being said here. And this is why I want to leave enough space for discussion and questions and a back and forth dialogue, because I believe it will be very, very helpful and help us to clearly understand more what's being said. So he's going into, in this topic, he's going into understanding the selflessness of phenomena. And Shantideva explains the selflessness of phenomena by discussing 4 areas of it. And the area we're talking about today is the mind. That's the first one. The next one is feelings. Oh boy. That's all I can say right now. The next one is feelings. The next one is the mind. And the last one is all other phenomena.
You said today was the mind.
Today's the body. Did I say the mind? Today's the body. We're talking about the body. So it's body, feelings, mind, and phenomena is what Shantideva is addressing here. He starts with the body in general, and then goes to the specific parts, the specific physical parts. He examines those. And through this process, Shantideva helps us understand why it is so important for us to let go of our attachment to the body and our attachment to our identification with it, our personal identification with the body. So just bear that in mind, that as we go through all of this information, there is a reason that completely has to do with the Bodhisattva path and love and compassion and stable ethics and things like that. Okay, so we start with the Shantideva's saying we have a mistaken view of how the body exists. And most of us think a lot about our body. We think about how it looks, its health, stuff like that. To us, the body appears as a real, truly existing thing that we grasp onto and hold on to. And in reality, according to the Buddha, the body has no true existence at all. We cling to it as if it did, because instead of thinking of it as something that's merely imputed by our conceptual minds, we impute a kind of reality onto the body that actually isn't there with our conceptual minds. We understand and perceive the body then to be something that really exists in and of itself, by its own nature and from its own side. And according to the Buddha, this is a kind of confused awareness and a mistaken reasoning that causes us to apprehend phenomena as if they were truly existent. And this mistaken conception is at the very root of cyclic existence. It's because of this mistaken conception about the way phenomena exist that ego self-grasping arises. And from ego self-grasping comes all suffering. So it's kind of a chain reaction. There is a complete misunderstanding of the way phenomena exist since beginningless time, apparently. And out of that misunderstanding, we develop this thing called an ego, the me, the I. We grasp at that me and that I, as if it were an inherently existing thing. This is what we were talking about in the selflessness of persons. And because of the afflictive emotions that arise due to that grasping, all of the suffering, and we're talking about a range of suffering that goes from simple dissatisfaction all the way to intense, torturous, mental, emotional, and physical pain. This is what the Buddha is saying. And this is why the cyclic existence is so dangerous, and why we really need to get at the root of it and eradicate the root of it. So another thing that's important to remember in all of this, as I said earlier, I think I said earlier, the Buddha never said to believe what he was saying. He said, you've got to test this out for yourself. And so the way we should think of all of this that's coming up, when I'm saying these things, don't think that they're like coming from on high and this is the way things are. Just take them as a hypothesis, like you would take any scientific hypothesis. This is the Buddha's hypothesis, if you want to put it that way, of the science of the mind and how it exists and how it works. So look at it that way, and I think it will be more helpful. I think some of the buttons that may get pushed won't necessarily get pushed. We look at it as a hypothesis. When we think to ourselves, we say my body is in good shape, or my body is in bad shape, or my body is good looking, or my body is bad looking. When we say things like that, we're not thinking specifically like my elbow is ugly or my head is in good shape. We have a sense of just a body that kind of exists inherently unto itself as this thing, and that's what we're talking about. The body, we're not talking about, when I say I feel good, we don't get so specific with it. We just go, I feel good, and we're thinking of the body that we attach ourselves to. So we instinctively have this impulse to think of the body as if it appears separate and unrelated to its parts, as if the body were some kind of whole, complete entity unto itself. That's the way we think of our body, and we cling to that very vivid appearance of that in our mind. And I think we're all pretty familiar with that. That's the way we think. So the Buddha says, the Buddha's hypothesis, if we want to put it this way, in reality, the body doesn't exist in the way we instinctively think it does. And in fact, it's lacking any kind of truly independent, inherent existence at all. So he says, if the body was truly existent, then it would have to be found in one of three places. So the first one, it would have to be a collection of all of its parts. 2, it would have to be found somewhere within its parts. Or 3, it would have to be found somewhere else. So those are the three options the Buddha has hypothesized. Upon investigation, Shantideva, the yogi Shantideva, doesn't find a truly existing body in any of these three possible places. So now we actually go into Shantideva's analysis of this. And remember that Shantideva was a highly realized yogi. We are not highly realized yogis, or I'm speaking for myself. I am not a highly realized yogi. So the analysis that Shantideva does is not the typical kind of analysis we would do, because he's coming from a completely different level of insight and awareness and understanding. So it's a very, it's important to think of it that way and to look at it that way. I think when we were doing the previous sessions, and I was talking about the way Shantideva was being so logical and precise in how he was debating particular views, I don't think those were put before this section by mistake at all. Because what I think Shantideva is alluding to is we have got to develop this kind of precise analysis in order to wade through this kind of information. I will tell you, not this particular section, but the next section coming up. Either I was asleep at the wheel, either my vessel had a hole in it, or I don't ever remember being taught the information that's coming up in this particular section. And so it's a real challenge. It is a real challenge. In reality, all right, so we go to stanza 78. This is where we start, Shantideva. Stanza 78. What we call the body is not feet or shins. The body likewise is not thighs or loins. It's not the belly, nor indeed the back. And from the chest and arms, the body is not formed. The body is not ribs or hands, armpits, shoulders, bowels, or entrails. It is not the head, and it is not the throat. What is the body, then, he asks, in all of this? As we discussed in the last sessions, the ego, the I, the me, is imputed upon, we sort of impute this idea of an ego, this concept of an ego, onto our aggregates of form and consciousness. So that's basically what our experience is. It's some kind of form and it's various kinds of consciousnesses. What we're talking about here is form. And when he's talking about form, our form is the body. So this is, we're talking about what we are imputing onto the body here. So what is the nature of the body? If we were asked to point to our body and describe what it was, we would say something like, my body, my body, or a human body. And the terms we use would be based on the collection of our head, feet, legs, hands, and so on. If we were asked if any one of these individual components, the legs, hands, feet, head, such as those, were the body, we would have to answer no. Because if each individual part of the body was the body, that would make any sense. Because it would mean that we would have as many bodies as there were individual parts. And that's just silly and it's absurd. Therefore, according to Shantideva's analysis so far, the feet and so on are the parts of the body, and a single human body is the thing which has those parts. The whole body is imputed on dependence on those parts, independence of those parts. None of those parts can be identified as being the body. So now he goes into the next stanza, which is stanza 80. If the body embeds itself, and with the members coincides, its parts indeed are present in those parts. But where does body in itself abide? So the hypothesis that Shantideva presents here is that the body, as a whole entity, occupies the same space with its individual parts, and it pervades all of them, part by part. But if the whole body exists in the parts, this would suggest that the body itself is not made up of parts. So the question is then, where does the body exist? Where? Then we go to stanza 81. But if the body, single and entire, is present in the hands and all the other parts, however many parts there are, the hands and all the rest, you'll find an equal quantity of bodies. It's like I said before, if the entire body itself were wholly and completely located in each of its parts, there would be as many whole bodies as there are parts, including the hands and so on. And we already can just already know that that doesn't make sense. That's not, we have no evidence of that. So, stanza 82. If the body is not outside or within its parts, how is it then residing in its members, in its parts? And since it is not other than its parts, how can you say that it exists at all? So when we look at our body, when we look for an object that we call body, that's imputed upon its parts by our conceptual mind, the body itself is not found either inside or on the surface of the individual parts. Since no independent, truly existent body can be found, how can it exist among those parts? And as the body surely can't be of some kind of different nature than its parts, then the conclusion Shantideva comes to is that the designation of body is merely a conceptual label that we give to the collection of parts, and it doesn't truly exist as some kind of independent, self-existing entity unto itself. So now we go to stanza 83. He says, thus, there is no, quote, body. It is through illusion with regard to hands and other parts that body as a notion is conceived. Just as on account of its specific shape, a pile of stones can be taken for a man. So although the body doesn't exist as such, it's through our ignorance and confusion that the idea of body occurs to the mind based on the assembly of the body's parts, physical parts. Aside from being a mere label, the body in fact has no existence, self-existence. For example, at twilight, when visibility is very dim, we could easily mistake a pile of stones for being a man. I think we probably all have done something like this. I know I have. I've made a mistake when the light is dim of thinking like a piece of wood or something like that is an actual person or an animal or something like that. We impute onto the thing that we're seeing, that we're not seeing clearly, we're imputing something onto it that actually isn't there. So it's because of our lack of sharp awareness and mistaken conclusions that we apprehend those parts as being a truly existing body. Same way that we would, apprehend pile of stones as being, oh wow, there's a man out there. You know? Stanza 84. As long as the conditions are assembled, the body will appear to be a man. As long as all the parts are likewise present, a body will appear therein. So as long as the causes for mistaking a pile of stones are as a man are present, we'll still see that pile of stones as being a man. As long as the light is dim and our conceptual mind is saying that's a man out there. It's sort of like the rope and the snakes example. It will appear to us as being a man. Similarly, on the basis of the assembly of the parts of the body, we will say such things as my body or good-looking body or bad-looking body, things like that. In these cases, the body clearly seems to exist to us from its own side. But in fact, the body is no more than a label which is assigned or chosen for a particular basis, although it seems very, very different from that. And here's where it gets interesting. As long as the conditions are fulfilled with regard to a specific shape, the body will continue to appear as male or female. But when these conditions are not complete, it will not do so, as when a change of sex occurs, or during the development of an unborn child, or when the body is cremated and only ashes are left. In just the same way, as long as the interconnected physical parts for imputing a body are found, a body will appear to us. But in themselves, these parts are not the body. They are just pieces of flesh and bone. So any discussion or questions on that aspect of it? Does it all seem clear? Does it make sense?
So Christopher, this is Brian. Can you read the first hypothesis that either the Buddha or Shantideva put forward about the body? You said there were three, and I'm trying to remember the wording of the first one.
You mean the three? Oh yeah, where it can be found?
Yeah, you read them today. I mean, you read them.
No, there are four factors of
Okay.
the selflessness of phenomena, but there are three places where actually the Buddha said that the body can be found. You're either going to find the body somewhere within its parts. You'll find the body as a collection of its parts, or somewhere else. So those are the three choices that the Buddha put forth.
So I guess the first one, if you find it, it's hard to find the body within its parts, I guess. But the second one you just said is you find the body is a collection of its parts. So I'm struggling a little bit with kind of the wording there that it's a collection of its parts, because a collection of parts in some way combined can create a body, right?
A collection of parts. It's sort of like a part, something like that. The collection of parts put together, when the parts are all together, what we do is then we'll label that collection of parts. And the collection of parts can have a particular function. For instance, the body itself and the car itself is nothing more than the collection of its parts. And it's a label that we assign to those collections of parts. Any object is like this, but that's all it is a label. The actual car as a body in and of itself doesn't exist without the collection of parts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what you're saying makes sense. I guess the way I think about this is that, everything is empty because everything is dependently arising, and everything depends on everything else, and not, I mean, it's in some general way. So yes, the body depends on its parts. And if you go to a part of the body and you dissect the part, you never can find anything that exists independently. And that's how I say, well, that's why self doesn't exist. That's why the body doesn't exist. And that's how I kind of think through this reasoning. So I'm trying to square that reasoning with kind of the reasoning that Shantideva is giving today, which, and maybe they're the same, but they don't strike me as being kind of the same.
I haven't finished with Shantideva's reasoning yet, and you're absolutely correct in your reasoning. You are, and that's Shantideva's reasoning as well, and that's where we're going next. We're going to the parts themselves.
Well,
Okay, all right.
I sort of have struggled along these lines too, which is like, well, why isn't the body the collection of its parts? Why isn't it just the collection? Why isn't that why?
Oh, yeah, why isn't a car just a collection of its parts?
Well, to me, that's what it is.
But what then is the car?
It's
but
the
what
label
is the
we give to the collection
That's right.
of parts.
It's the label we give to the collection of parts.
And the way we use the collection of parts.
Right, and how it functions.
So it's
That's why it was, when it's functioning, we'll call it a car. When it's not functioning, we'll call it junk.
Yeah, okay, so similarly.
Or like the body, when it's not functioning.
If your
anymore,
arm has been bitten off by a lion, you don't go, he has my body. You'd go, he has my arm.
And then we get back to the who's this, me, mine. Who's the thing that thinks it owns all of this?
Anyway, yeah.
That goes back to the selflessness of persons that we were talking about last time. So, anymore.
I mean, conventionally speaking, for just thinking out loud here, in our day-to-day conventional world,
Yes.
so we can communicate with each other, we have a word called body that refers to this collection of parts that is, as Brian just pointed out, completely interdependent.
Absolutely. That is conventional reality. Yes.
What we're actually, the reason we're going into all this is because we make a mistaken leap in our thinking that it's more than what I just said, that it's more than the label we put on the parts. We make a leap in our assumption that it's, or we just have a primordial leap that it's more than that.
Right.
That it's its own thing.
And if we go back to what I said at the very, very beginning, what we're trying to get at here is not, we know what, or we experience conventional reality all the time. But in order for, if we want to be on the Bodhisattva path, if we want to develop our love and compassion to the level that we can actually really be of benefit to others, and it's very, very stable, we have to have an understanding and then a realization of the ultimate nature of the way things are. And that's what we're talking here. We're not talking about the conventional nature. Conventionally speaking, yes, there's a body, there's a lamp, there's a piano, there's Kavita, Teresa, Ajay, Dickey. All conventionally, yes, that exists. But when we actually analyze it as to how does this ultimately exist, we find that it's not the way it conventionally exists. The conventional appearances are necessary for us to even function with one another.
But I think the conventional this concept we have is the source of suffering. So I think we're trying to go to the place where you want to get out of suffering. So you have to go all the way deep level to know, which I don't know how many years it's going to take, life years.
Lifetimes, right?
But I guess that's where we're heading to. That
this
is the main cause of suffering, that we believe we are. This lamp, Chris, Kavita, here we are.
Yeah, I mean that's what
suffering.
The Bodhisattva path is training us to go toward in that direction. Yeah. So now we go to the next level, which is the level Brian was already going to, is that the parts of the body themselves have no truly independent self-existence. And this is interesting because now we're getting into the level of atoms and subatomic particles in the 8th century. Stanza 85. Likewise, since it is a group of fingers, the hand itself does not exist as such, and so it is with fingers made of joints, and joints themselves consist of many parts. So what Shantideva just did was he gave us an analysis of the body as a whole thing, like when we were talking about a car as a whole. And he said, basically, all that it is a label that we are putting onto that collection of parts so that we can sort of function with it and talk about it and conventionally work with it. It is a label. So now he's getting to the components themselves. So, even if the body doesn't exist, we still can't say that it's limbs and the arms and so on, which we can see with our eyes. We can't say that they really exist either. The hand, of course, is imputed upon the collection of the fingers and the palm and the nails and all these things. But then you get down to the joints, right? So the joints are also a collection of parts in here, right? So it's like the car. It's like the hand itself. It's just sort of like a car, right? We see this hand and we see this thing and we give it a label, hand. But there are so many parts in here that we also then give labels so that we can kind of identify them and talk about them. But in reality, none of those labels exist inherently, exist independently. They're just labels put on some things for, you could say, convenience, convention. So we'll get into the stanza 86. So now he's talking about what happens with all these parts. He says these parts themselves will break down into particles, and particles divide according to direction. These fragments too, black, partless parts, they are like space. Thus, even particles have no existence. So the joint of the finger, right? It can be subdivided down into its parts. So you have the bones, and you have well, let's just go with the bones. You have the bones. So the bones then can be broken down into their parts, and you get down to atoms. The atoms that sort of are combined to form what we would call the bone. Those are what you could maybe say that's its most basic component, the atoms. But it's also the knuckle, or the knuckle is not found among those atoms either. Once again, the whole is designated independent on all of its components, but it can't be found to exist independently of it. The reason this is important, I'm going to go back to the beginning. The reason this is important is that we, according to the Buddha, time without beginning, have mistakenly viewed phenomena as if they did independently exist. If we look around the room that we're in, and we look at the way everything appears to us, everything does appear as if it's separate, as if it's existing independently, right? It appears that way. And the Buddha is saying, since time without beginning, this has been our mode of apprehending things. And the problem, the big, 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 big problem that arises because of this way we have view phenomena as existing independently is that we then view this idea of me, I, as some kind of independently existing thing. And this is where the rubber hits the road in terms of suffering. It's the ego, it's the me, it's the I, it's the attachment and the grasping at that as being an inherently independently existing thing that causes all of the suffering. It's important to remember that when we're talking about this which all sounds like, well, this is science, this is really interesting science, but what does it have to do with love and compassion? You know, it has a lot to do with it. That's why it's important to keeping that in the front of our awareness as we study this stuff. An atom can be analytically subdivided into what in Buddhism they call 6 basic directional, you could say directional units or segments, and that would be would be north, south, east, west, up, and down is how you would just commonly put it. So when we get down to an atom, they will say, all right, we can break this down, or get down to a subatomic particle. We can break that particle down. If we can't even find, anything else, we can say, well, then it can be broken up into segments, into directions. And once we get into that aspect of it, when you try then to break up those directions into segments, you wind up with nothing. You wind up with something that is like uncompounded space. It's just empty. So what they're saying is, when you actually analyze all of this, and you get down to its most basic subatomic level, it's empty. There's nothing actually there. Materially, there's no matter there.
Chris?
Yeah.
Has anybody heard of a name called Bruce Lipton? He's, I've read his book, and I think it correlates to what we're talking about. He's a molecular biologist whose job was to scientifically, he didn't have any background of Buddhism or nothing like this. He was simply a molecular biologist, and his job was to dissect, down to the atom level and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually he came to a point where he could not dissect the atom into, further, which is the neutrons and protons and all that. And he came to a conclusion that all it was is just the energy flowing, neutrons and protons acting together, forming the base of the atom, forming the particles to the elements too. So he is active today, touring around, which is his main theory is the quantum physics now, where it's all energy level. He's a personality who I've read, follow, that he came to a point scientifically going through all the way to the energy level.
Yeah.
So he's now promoting this quantum physics concept, and he does a lot of teachings and all that. But anyway, my point is to have a scientific background, people going down. Now he's following everything that we're talking about.
I think,
and that's a live person story I wanted to share.
Yeah, I mean, that's great, because I think one of the advantages we have right now of living at the time we do, and the way science is sort of exploding in terms of its understanding of reality, is that it is helping us. It's helping us put into context what these Buddhist teachings have been talking about for centuries, long before our current science understood what these yogis were talking about in terms of particles and partless particles and things like that. What it says to me, when I think of the things that they were, say, such as Shantideva or the Buddha, what they were coming up with is an amazing evidence of the power of our mind.
Yes, back in 8th century
Mhm.
BC, they were talking about exactly what I would say Bruce
Yeah.
Lipton found out
Right.
scientifically, going through a point where this is it. I have gone down to a level feeling this energy. So he believes big time in energy now, and he does a lot of teaching.
What is his name again?
Lipton,
The book, the author of the book?
his name is Bruce Lipton, and he's got lots of books, 3 or 4 really good books. But if you look up Bruce Lipton, you should find him. Yeah.
Thank you.
So that's really,
Yeah,
that's good to hear that. I mean, it
I was
sounds like it
impressed with-
corroborates what's being
Yeah.
said.
because he had no background of nothing sort of like that. He was a true scientist.
Yeah, so when we're talking about all of this matter, it winds up
It's energy.
being energy, it's immaterial basically. Yeah. And in Buddhism, when they talk about the mind, what they're referring to is consciousness, and they say it is not matter. It's not matter at all. It is awareness and it's clarity, but it's not a material thing, which is interesting. And I wonder, at some point, is our own science going to come to that conclusion? Well, we can't seem to find consciousness anywhere in any of these particles and subatomic particles and protons and the neutrons. So, what is it? What is consciousness actually? So I think we live in a fortunate time for us to be understanding this path. It may not be a fortunate time for some other things, but it's for this, yes, I would say it is. So basically he says, we can take any apparent form and analytically dissect it, going from comparatively gross to more subtle fragments down to the directional segments of the infinitesimal particle, and they'll be seen to be empty like space. They have no existence as physical forms. And this, according to His Holiness and B. Alan Wallace in that commentary, B. Alan Wallace, who is a scientist himself, says this form of analysis is suitable to both quantum physics and the classical concepts of the atom and subatomic particles. The atom or particle may not be conceived as having a particular size and location, but all theories about the types of particles that exist and how they relate to one another will attribute certain defining characteristics to those particles. Otherwise, they would be indistinguishable from other entities. As soon then as the particle is conceived as having certain qualities, then we can proceed with the same analysis, which is what is the nature of that particle? What is the relationship between the whole and the part? Even when you get down to that, particle, what is the relationship between the whole and the part? And the whole is simply a label. A photon is simply a label put onto a type of energy. That's all. Just like a car is a label put onto an assembly of parts that have a function like a car. So now we get into the point of this is that he's saying, Shantideva is saying, and the Buddha is saying, that there is a real need for us to let go of our attachment to the body, to let go of our attachment to this thing as if it exists the way it appears to us, sort of independently from its own side. This goes to the very root of the kind of attachment that we have towards our ego, our self. Because that ego and self arose from thinking all phenomena exist in some kind of independent fashion. Therefore, I must as well. And so there's a real need for us on this path if we want to be on the Bodhisattva path and all that it entails. it requires us to let go of the attachment we have to the body. So in stanza 77, Shantideva says, all form, therefore, is like a dream. And who will be attached to it? Who thus investigates? The body, in this way, has no existence. What, therefore, is male and what is female? It's a real kicker for today's society. Having analyzed the body in this way, not even the slightest fragment of it can be found to have any true independent self-existence. Therefore, he's saying, what intelligent and wise person would develop such strong attachment to this thing that's illusory? It's like a dream, an illusory dreamlike body. And all the commentaries are saying, they're using these exact words, it's completely inappropriate to become so attached. Every commentary uses this word, inappropriate. Like,
it makes me remember Geshe Drakpa's attitude when he, to our, to us, appearing to be gravely ill with multiple myeloma, and he didn't seem that worked up over it.
oh, that he was gravely ill.
It was, yeah, he was gravely ill with this multiple myeloma. Yet, when Christopher, and he was in pain and he passed away from it, but he was like, I don't know, it was sort of like samsara. What do you expect?
Yeah.
It was interesting to observe his attitude about it.
I remember telling him, I was saying, I'm saying prayers for you, Geshe, and he laughed. He said, oh, shit, you don't need to say prayers for me. You don't need to say prayers for me. His attitude was completely
But so,
upbeat.
assuming he had some level of not only intellectual understanding, but had a taste of what this is talking about. And you can almost even imagine, even I can imagine being gravely ill and in pain and, recollecting this and it having a beneficial effect on, just the state of my overall consciousness, the equilibrium, I suppose.
Yeah, I think maybe when one gets to the level like of a yogi, they can actually transform pain somehow. When you think about these yogis that the scientists will put them in freezers, right? These big, industrial kind of freezing places, and the yogis will sit there and they will generate enough heat to keep themselves from freezing. They just do it, so this raises all kinds of questions for us about the nature of reality and how things exist and what is possible. So we continue with this. So since a person's body has no true existence, it's impossible for the person to have any true existence. So since the body has no existence and the self is imputed upon the body, our ego and me and I, all this stuff is totally wrapped up in, my body. So he's saying, in this case, how can there be such a thing as a truly existent male body and a truly existent female body? The terms man and woman are designated on the basis of the differences between the male and female bodies. Since the bodies that are the bases of those imputations actually can't be found under analysis, how could a man or a woman intrinsically, inherently exist?
Would that be the same for like a black person, a yellow person,
Absolutely.
a white person? tall
Absolutely.
person.
Yeah, because we're talking about, we develop this, the ego develops this identification with this, whatever color it is, whatever shape it is, whatever it is, and thinks this is what I am, and becomes very attached to that. This is right now, currently, all forms of gender identity cannot truly or inherently exist for this same reason. If we apply the same logical analysis and reasoning to such current terms as straight, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, asexual, non-binary, plus all of the gender identities and sexual orientations that letters and words cannot yet fully describe, we will come to the same conclusion. All of these terms are merely conceptual labels given to a collection of parts that, when analyzed, are not found to intrinsically or inherently exist. It's the same. This is where buttons get pushed. And this is where it's really important for us to understand what the Buddha and what Shantideva is saying here.
Well, I mean, they're also not raising it to some grandiose level of importance. It's actually to be a leveling thing. It's like, come on.
Right. So,
I mean, and then I just want to jump into in a way, right now, my understanding of my very limited understanding, and this would be a good topic, perhaps, is that there are people who have one kind of body and and feel, and have come to the conclusion or in the process of discovering that maybe their body and the gender they identify with don't correspond with each other. And so it's not like, so there's a conceptual element that says, I'm not, my conceptual framework and psychological framework don't match the physical vehicle I have. And I don't like that. Some people like what they are, some people don't like they are, some people want to be something else. I mean, there's this whole weird, interesting, it's much more out there now, but that's not the point. They're not trying to, Shantideva and the Buddha aren't trying to raise it to the level of some holy big importance. They're trying to say it's way bigger than that, folks.
The problem we have basically has nothing to do with the labels. Yeah, the problem that's occurring with all of us is not about the labels. This problem completely transcends labels. The problem is that we take these labels and we look at the thing that these labels are describing or identifying, and we say, and then we feel that the label actually inherently and independently exists the way it appears to. And that's where the problem lies. Not with the name or the label, but the sort of this primordial feeling that this is who I am. This is the way I exist.
And that's never true.
And that's not true. The way
that's wow, that's wild.
The way we exist is like what the whole process that we've been going through. That everything depends on something else. It's a dependent arising. And when you actually get as far as you can go, there is nothing there actually but energy. And the energy itself is a dependent arising. It does not exist concretely independently unto itself. So this is where the problem lies, not in the labels. The labels are I mean, labels are fine. They are describing something, but we all have, as Buddhists, we have a sort of a responsibility to the Bodhisattva path to not be concretizing these things. Because otherwise, I'm going back to what we were talking about before. Our love and compassion is going to be unstable without this kind of wisdom, without this view. So, here's my final thoughts on this. In order for us to develop our love and compassion to the degree that it becomes stable, powerful, and truly beneficial, we have to let go of our own inappropriate attachment and aversion to these dreamlike, non-truly existing bodies, whether they're ours or others. I mean, look at the aversion some people can have for some other kinds of people, and they think. I go to this. We're currently in our society, we have this incredible split going on, and we have one group of people who will look at another group and say, those people are so bad, they are so evil, they are the cause of all the problems that we have, and we just cannot associate with them. We need to be rid of them. We need to move away from them. And then the other side is going, all of these people are so messed up and so confused, and they're saying such ridiculous things. I can't even be around them. I cannot tolerate them. This is what we've got going on presently. And it's all a big mistake we're making. We are concretizing all of these appearances and people and bodies as if they inherently, truly, independently existed the way they are appearing to us. And what we don't ever recognize is that these feelings we have, these feelings of hatred, of aversion, of disgust towards others, where do those exist? Where are those feelings? Those feelings exist in our own mind stream. They are poisoning our own mind stream. So if we're holding these kinds of feelings and thoughts, we are poisoning our own consciousness. We are poisoning our habitual propensities. And we will experience the effects of the poison. So we have to let go. We have to let go of this attachment that we have to things existing as if they were independent and truly existing and the way they appear to us. Because we will never, our compassion will be totally unstable. We will not have compassion for those who we think are inherently evil. We just won't. And if we are on this Bodhisattva path and want to be on this Bodhisattva path, we have to really look at this, analyze it the way the yogis analyze it, the way the Buddha analyzes it, so that we can basically, we can actually, what we have to do, what we really have to do is we have to develop equanimity. Equanimity is an extremely important concept in Buddhism, and especially in the Bodhisattva path. Bodhisattva has to have equanimity. And equanimity is, I looked it up, I'll read the definition so I get it right. Equanimity is the psychological stability and composure which is undisturbed by afflictive emotions, pain, or any other phenomena that would otherwise cause us to lose our mental balance. And this is what we have to develop. When we're doing the four immeasurable thoughts, we're talking about equanimity there. So it's this view that you know, and I've seen this with His Holiness. His Holiness will walk into a room with somebody and engage in conversation in a very pleasant one with somebody who I personally in the past have not. Oh, Your Holiness, you should not be talking to that politician, because that politician is evil. But that's not what His Holiness does. His Holiness has complete equanimity. He's completely stable. And his whole purpose is to be a benefit and to help through example.
Years ago, I was just remembering something that years and years ago, Christopher and I were studying very intensely with a Sufi guy from Egypt, and he was teaching us how to pronounce Arabic so that we could do a meditation practice on the 99 names of Allah, which is a big, other topic. But in any case, and we studied pretty intensely with him for quite a few years. Lomped onto and finally finding space to go to our spiritual path home. But in any case, he used to say something all the time. It was around 2000 just before 2000 and right after 2001. So it was before and after 9/11. And he was a very terrorist-looking Muslim from Egypt. And
Sunglasses.
so he basically alarmed everybody after 2001 that we were friends with him. But in any case, okay, so the main point I wanted to say is he used to always say, when talking about politics, he was very universal in his view of things, as Sufis tend to be if they're mystics like they are. And he would say all the time, watching the news, no matter what it was, he's not 100% right, he's not 100% wrong. And it sounds trite and it sounds simplistic, but it's actually quite profound. No matter what side of any political or issue or whatever, you could take all the hot button issues of our time and all the fringe lunatics the way you see them, or the people that you think you are allies with, and you have to, equanimity in some ways it summarizes as, I am not 100% right and I'm not 100% wrong. Joe Blow, this horrible guy, is not 100% right, he's not 100% wrong. I mean, and you have to force yourself to really, in your heart, as you know intellectually that it is a fact. No matter what the fringe lunatic, you're a fringe lunatic. In general, there's something that's, maybe objectively they're 85% wrong, but that there's a reason why their 15% is driving them so strongly. The 15% quote right that they are. And I'm just, anyways, it should be a leveling and it's humbling. And it's stuck with me all these years now. This, well, he's not 100% right, and he's not 100% wrong.
Kavita always says that.
Christopher, I had a question back on equanimity. I had thought it meant kind of just calmness, but I had read something that said that equanimity meant really seeing everybody as equal to yourself, that, the kind of exchanging self with others, that really seeing that every other person, fringe lunatic or 100% lunatic or not, they're still just us. That's what equanimity meant. And I forget where I read that. Had you ever heard that definition?
I would agree with you. And the part of the equanimity definition is that when we can see that everybody is like us, they're just like us. We are all actually interconnected. We are like one another. then the equanimity part of it means that we won't become disturbed. We won't get out of balance. We won't fly off the handle because somebody said something that, you know, we didn't like. We'll be able, but we have to train in it. We have to train in it. And this is the whole, this is a major part of the Bodhisattva training. So if we properly train in equanimity, then we will develop loving kindness that's stable. We will develop compassion that's stable. We will develop wisdom that is stable. And like His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, we can then actually become agents for peace in the world. You know, no matter who we're with, who we're talking to, what the issues are, we will have that view that we are like one another.
In the Four Immeasurables, that there's almost a self-contained definition. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment to friends and hatred to so-called enemies. I mean, that is another summary.
Yes, and we have to make that more than just words we say.
I mean, and this
seeing everybody as oneself leads to equanimity, but isn't necessarily a definition of it.
It's also, our English words, we're forced to try to transport maybe more other philosophies that don't have a direct correlation word in our language.
And I guess one last comment was, just talking about the people that tend to want to make us feel hatred is, just kind of, it's their karma. It's not, it's not like you can really hold them accountable, and they have to deal with their own karma, and we can't let it bother us except to make us aware of our own ego-centeredness and biases. So anyway.
It's strange because you're right, and it's strange because we get so in a way insulated into our paradigm, in our view of what is correct. And sometimes we end up being absolutely not correct, even though, we're learned, we're well-read, we're well-educated, and so on and so forth. It could still be that there was a conspiracy, for example, to murder John Kennedy, 60 years ago, that it was the CIA. But, if you come down, you get this, they create this term conspiracy theorists. So in other words, even though, the Warren report and all those things, officialdom stamped it, oh no, it was Lee Harvey Oswald and only Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, over the years, the more and more research and the more and more of the conditions that were surrounding the whole event, it becomes less and less likely. But still, to this day, my point is that sometimes we don't realize that our paradigm of what is correct is based on.
Well, that, I originally saw this bumper sticker in Boulder. I don't know how long it's been around, but it was, don't believe everything you think.
I love it. I love it.
Oh, that's a good one.
And there's a new person, John, who's on the chat, who's not able to get his audio to work. And he had asked me to ask you a question, which is this. And I don't know why, I don't know why he can't, but that's not something I can solve. It says, what is Shantideva's understanding of a bodhisattva? Is it one with correct aspiration, or is it one who has realized emptiness?
Oh, it's both. There is we have a bodhisattva in aspiration, somebody who aspires to develop bodhicitta, which is this awakened heart and mind that wants to be of benefit to all sentient beings. And it always starts out as an aspiration, unless you had done the work so much in previous lives that you just come out as a bodhisattva. Then there is what is called engaged bodhicitta, or of the bodhisattva that's actually engaged in the practice. And that is that's a whole evolving thing. It's an evolutionary thing. Currently, right now, most of us, I think, including myself, aspire to this. You know, I see the value. I can see this is making sense to me, and I aspire to be a bodhisattva. And so I'm trying to engage in it. I'm trying to do things, trying to change my behavior in ways, change my thinking, so that it's in line with this. But I'm always checking to make sure that it's logical and it's making sense to me, and that from my own experience, I can see that it's making a change in me. So, I mean, John, there's kind of a spectrum, and it starts out with just aspiring to be a bodhisattva, and then it's sort of like, you know, starting out on the yellow brick road, and just one little brick at a time, going in a very tight spiral, and then it just starts to become a big journey.
Well, John has another difficult question. And I have one too. The easy one, I think, is mine. So if you're a bodhisattva and you come back and you go through samsara again, is it painful to you, or are they beyond pain? Is there suffering for a bodhisattva who returns to help others? Or is it suffering free?
It would depend on the level of the bodhisattva. If the bodhisattva had gone all the way to enlightenment, there would not be suffering.
Okay.
Because there would be, the highest realization that you could have. And so even though there may be appearances, say like we were talking about Geshe Drakpa, I don't know what level he's at, but he never showed that he was suffering.
Now, John's question was, what do you think realized bodhisattvas would do in our divided country today?
I think they would be very similar to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I mean, what you would do is, one by one, person by person, whoever you came in contact with, you would have a very open heart and mind. And because you had been training and practicing, and training in equanimity, and training in all of the practices of Bodhisattva, you would have flawless ethics. You would have very stable compassion. You would have very stable wisdom. And so in any situation you were with anyone, you could always make them feel comfortable with you, right? And make them feel like they matter. This is what everybody says when they talk with His Holiness. They say, "You made me feel as if I was just the most important person." His attention to me was so complete that I just was overwhelmed by his the way he made me feel. And this is what I think a bodhisattva, either in training, aspiring, or a fully realized Buddha, this is what you would do. It's person to person.
I think right now what the bodhisattva would do would be a stand-up comic.
As a bodhisattva, I mean, you could.
Right.
A bodhisattva could be a stand-up comic. The kind that is the kind that just brings people together, and the kind that makes people see their commonality and laugh at the mistakes that we make. That laughter is a wonderful thing. It's an energy that raises this, attitude. So yeah, a bodhisattva could be a stand-up comic. Why not? His Holiness is funny. Why not? Of course.
To answer Anne's question, I was listening. I think there's a lot of big projects happening right now. MIT, Harvard, bridging what we talk about, and then the modern world, everything bridging together to bring the effect of Bodhisattva to those rulers who rules the country. It becomes a better leaders and all that. So, like I said, to answer Anne's question, there are lots and lots of projects happening right now to bridge those two, work together to make better leaders, basically. Yeah. I mean, there are lots of leaders, but without much of a wisdom and compassion, that
exactly
benefit.
Yeah. I mean, it's
so there's a lot of projects happening right now, because I told you about the Priyadarshi who was one of the monk who became from, Brahmin he's leading a project in Nike right now, very cost, ethics, and the business world. So there's big projects happening. So I think in the future, it's going to have better leaders, trained, become more compassionate leader, which is people. So that's my hope.
Yeah,
I-
that's a good hope.
Well, ultimately, that's where it's going to have to go.
Yeah.
That's where it will have to go, because otherwise, if it doesn't, it just ends up in destruction. Because what happens if you just follow ego, the ego grasping? That is the cause of suffering. And the only solution is to let go of that and to develop very, very stable wisdom that recognizes that because everything is actually interconnected and interdependent, then it makes the most logical sense to make everything work for everyone and to find a way to do that. Not to separate off and bomb and create wars and try to destroy who we don't like. That's not the solution. Anyway. Yes.
John has typed one more thing. He says, I think the observation of the anatman quality of self and other is helpful for developing ahimsa. I don't know what that is. In a divided society, we can start to break down our unhelpful model of us and them, still hard to do consistently.
Yes. It actually practice. We have to practice it because it's not something that they say from beginningless time. We haven't been doing this, so that's why it's called a path of consciousness. It's a training in consciousness, and this training requires practice. We can read all we want, and think, oh, these are nice ideas, but unless we actually put them into practice, no change is going to happen within ourselves, and then definitely no change within our environment. So we have to basically take the responsibility. What's that saying? Be the change you want to see in the world. It's a very true. Yeah, it's a very true statement. Be the change that you want to see in the world. But recognize how things actually exist, so you can be the correct kind of change. The change that's good for everyone involved, not just the humans either. Anyway, we should stop past time, and so we'll just say a couple of closing prayers. Let's just go to the final dedication because we're over time, and we'll say this in English. In all my lives, may I not be separated from true lamas, and so enjoy the splendor of Dharma. Fully perfecting the virtues of levels and paths, may I speedily attain the state of Vajradhara. Vajradhara is primordial. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Hey, Anne?
Yes.
Thank you, Christopher.
Ahimsa means non-violence.
Thank you. Yes. John had texted that to me, explaining it. I'm glad that you knew. And I guess everybody else knew too.
Okay, I'm just going to stop this recording